Hello, welcome back to Scripture Central. I'm Lynne Hilton Wilson, here to talk about Come Follow Church History. Today, we're going to give a historical background for Section 25. We get Emma, and I have one of the most studied scholars on Emma Hale Smith with me, Mark Staker from the Church History Department. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
We are so glad to have you here. We at Scripture Central try very hard to use restored scriptures to illuminate Jesus Christ, and we want to make him more accessible and defensible. And so today, as we dive into the historical background of Emma in Section 25 of the Doctrine and Covenants, we want to address some of these hard questions. What do we know about Emma's childhood? And I thought you would be the best person in the world to talk about this, so I brought you in on that one. Do we know anything about Emma's testimony, and why didn't she go west? And we'll just dive in. I'll probably start with a little historical background on when this section came, and then I want you to do most of the talking.
Okay, glad to answer those questions.
We know the church was organized on April 6th, 1830, but Emma doesn't come to that time. And the first conference on June 9th, 1830, is also in the Peter Whitmer home, and Emma is there. And so we have there at that conference 30 members now are baptized. Many friends are there. Just as it was in the organization, they have the sacrament. They have confirmations, priesthood ordinations. This is, they don't have church meetings. This is such an important gathering. There has been nothing where everyone's come together since the organization of the church. It's really beautiful. There's prophecies given and visions given. And then the next month, in July, is when Emma receives her revelation. Now, her birthday is July 10th. So could this be a birthday present from the Lord? I don't know.
I'd never thought of it that way before, but it's sure a delightful way to think about it. It's an important time for her as she's preparing herself for her future role in the church, and so it comes at an opportune time.
And in addition to her being 26 years old, she has known about the Book of Mormon and its processes now for multiple years. And I almost like thinking about her blessing here in Section 25 as if it were foretelling her future almost as well.
I'm touched by Carol Cornwall Madson's arguments, and she's an inspired and delightful scholar who has suggested that perhaps this revelation, 3 years before there's a patriarch in the church to give patriarchal blessings, fills that role for Emma going on. But it's so much more than that.
I love it. It's a patriarchal blessing. Yeah,
and it includes details that are for all women in the church, but for all members of the church. What I say unto one, I say unto all. This is for all of us, and we can all get some inspiration and guidance.
Yes, we all need to learn to comfort and to console and to work together with our community and our spouses or our families, whatever our unit is in the church. But the fact that she's called to expound scriptures and to exhort the church are things that haven't happened quite yet in the early church meetings. And I'm thrilled to see that this is a dramatic change in much Christianity and even the Judaic and Islamic world. People of the book did not have a lot of women preachers. And yet this is one of those dramatic changes. So is this a product of the environment? No. Joseph is revealing these words from God to Emma that is a change in 1830.
Right, yeah. There are women in some congregations speaking in some contexts, but not in a formal, organized way, and not being set apart as a instructor in the way that Emma is. This is a real divergence.
Joseph says she's going to be ordained, which we use the word a little differently now, but I'm really touched by the fact that she is given authority to preach and expound the scriptures.
Yeah.
There's one more part of this section that I think will be important for our historical background, and that's when she's told to lay aside the things of this world and to seek for things of a better. And she was raised in wealth.
As far as I can tell, they are the wealthiest family in the county. And it doesn't seem, her father's not well educated. He's not a lawyer, a judge, or something, but he's a hunter. And as a hunter, He figures out a way to go out, get lots of deer. Mostly, we don't know exactly what animals, but we were able to find lots of deer bones doing archaeology. And I know that's one of the things that he's hunting. And he's shipping this meat downriver. Most of it goes to Philadelphia, where they're able to sell it at a very good price and bring back a lot of money. But they're also cutting down lumber. Her brothers are shipping the lumber downriver. And Philadelphia is one of their major markets, and other large cities down in southern Pennsylvania.
Well, they've got enough money to build this beautiful home and to have many nice things in it.
They do. They do have a lot of nice things in their home. We had to guess at what kinds of nice things for the.
Okay, I got to tell everybody, Mark Staker is in charge of all of what we have in the restoration here. So tell us more about it. This is important.
Well, we went through their probate records and other things, and they did have a clock, and they did have a few books, which was really rare. They didn't have a library in the area. So when Joseph's working on his translation of the Book of Mormon, he can't go to the library and ask if Jerusalem has walls around it, for example. He has to ask Emma, who is his source of knowledge. But the Hale family does have a half dozen books in their home. And so for this area and this context, they have nice things. So we had to guess at some of what those nice things were, but we know that they were, that Emma had a lot. When Joseph asked her to marry him, and then they end up leaving the valley, she's not just leaving her old faith behind. She's leaving all her worldly possessions. She's leaving all her friends. She's leaving a lot behind. And as a matter of fact, she is the first person in the Church of Christ that's asked to leave things behind and to make a sacrifice in that kind of way.
Wow. I hadn't thought of that. But it even says, doesn't she ask that letter that she writes to her father after she's married Joseph? Doesn't she say, can I have my furniture and my cow?
She wants her things.
Does she have furniture?
Emma is very capable. And as far as we can tell, she's bringing in a lot of money herself to provide for herself already before she's married. She has cows, not just one. As far as we can tell, she has at least 4. They have to be several years old to appear in the tax records, and so she's got younger calves as well. She's milking these cows and has a whole dairy operation going on. Wow. She brings in a lot of money. She's buying furniture, buying clothing. She has a lot of goods that she brings to the marriage.
But she doesn't have them initially. She leaves them in order to marry him, and then she comes back.
She leaves behind all those things that she's acquired. Yeah, so her own goods. Yeah. She leaves it all behind. Yeah.
Let's start with a timeline just to help us keep straight. As a teacher, I got to stick with the order here. 1804 is when she's born, and she's the 7th of 9 children to Elizabeth and Isaac Hale. And then in 1825, in the autumn, is when she meets Joseph and Joseph's father, as they come down, and we'll talk about their responsibility there. We don't know exactly what Emma was doing when they met, possibly working there with her at her father's place as a cook, or sometime a woman in the community. I don't know.
Some of her descendants, her grandchildren, suggest she was the family cook, and we know from contextual evidence and other things that was one of her roles. She provides food for the family, and Joseph, when he comes down into the valley with his father to work on some neighboring property, they are fed by the Hale family. So naturally, as the cook, she's going to be the one feeding them.
Okay, so that's when he meets his wife. He meets his father-in-law in November of that year, and they aren't married on January 18th, 1827. In the past, we've used the word eloped, and I want to hear more of your thoughts on that when we get to that one. After they marry, they go back up to Joseph's family and live in Manchester, Palmyra area in New York. But that summer, she writes her parents and says, can I have these things that we just talked about? And they stay there near Palmyra until Joseph receives the plates. And we'll talk more about that, as Emma is the right person. And then in the fall, it sounds like Joseph had already written Emma's brother and said, can you help? Can you bring us a wagon and take our things down there? And we're going to move there because it's getting too hard to keep these plates safe.
Yeah, he writes to the family, and they're going to come down and work. That's about the time that they know that Emma's expecting. The end of September, she's expecting her first child, and not long after that, a few weeks later, the Hale family invites them to come down and live with them. So.
Well, I'm sure it would have been much easier on Emma delivering her first child with her mom there, too, although she did have a sweet relationship with Lucy Mack Smith. By December, I think they arrive. Is that accurate?
They appear in the tax records the first week of December, just days after they've arrived. Joseph says they arrive in December, and so it would have to be that first few days that they're
Great.
there.
And then early in 1828, she is acting as scribe. Of course, we don't have those original papers. They were part of the destroyed sections that we've talked about in the past. But let's talk about Emmy. The fact that you found that she had this wonderful nickname is beautiful to me.
And that comes from her later friends, her Latter-day Saint friends in Nauvoo are calling her that, but it seems that it's in use when she's a child, because her siblings all had nicknames as well. And her mother, Elizabeth, is known as Betty. And so they all have kind of these casual names that they use.
I just love it. And I love the fact that you've been able to find out that she liked horseback riding and that she was very physical, that she grew up canoeing. And I just think this is so fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit more about her?
She's very much an outdoor person, and she's called upon to ride horses a lot in her life. And later on, she actually rides one bareback when she goes to tell Joseph that he's needed at home. And it's not even her horse. It's a stray horse that she's able to get on. So she's got a lot of skill as a horseback rider that Joseph never had. He was not quite as experienced with horses. And so that's one thing that she's able to bring to the marriage is that skill. Yeah. She loves her physicality, doing those kind of things. The most important talent I think she gets as a child is her music. And some of the girls her age, they don't mention her by name, but they're keeping journals. And when they're courting the young men, they go and listen to piano concerts at various homes in the area. And I would like to think that Emma does that along with them. And as a matter of fact, her family could have owned a piano. We don't know. It's not listed in the probate records, but she is one of the leading singers in the local choir at church, and Emma loves to sing. And there is also a young woman who's writing hymns and submitting them to the local paper. She uses a pseudonym, so we don't know if that's Emma, but it's popular for the girls in her valley to write hymns and to sing, and she does the singing part, at least we know, very well.
What was her education like?
She writes incredibly well.
Did she go to a boarding school, or was there a school there in Susquehanna?
There's a school just down the road, 1.5 miles away.
Oh, close.
Taylorsville is the name of the neighboring little village. There are villages within the larger Harmony Township, and Taylorsville is the closest school. She would have gone there to school for a while, but there is a young women's boarding school in the county seat of Montrose. And many young women went there. Those of the best financially most comfortable families went to that boarding school. She could have gone there. We don't know.
They don't keep records of her name.
They don't list any of their students.
Okay. Well, you also mentioned earlier that she was also trained after a medical discipline called the Thompson system.
Well, Thompsonian medicine begins in Vermont, and it becomes popular throughout the United States. About 30% of the population is really involved in that medical perspective. Many of them are Vermonters who flee Vermont because of weather and other conditions. Yeah. And her family is part of that. So they'd use herbs and mild things to treat illnesses, and she continues to do that throughout her life. She teaches her grandchildren and other family members some of those recipes, and they survive later on.
Well, I was impressed when as a nurse, I was very interested in this. So I began looking up, and they they were trying to use a lot of steam for respiratory issues and keep a lot of liquid boiling so that it would help healing from some of these. And I thought that was brilliant. And we have evidence that she was continuing on in some of these other ideas as well.
Yes. Those are some of the methods that they developed, and there is suggestion that Emma actually did these very same kinds of medical treatments later on as she had illnesses with her children.
Yeah, trying desperately to keep them alive.
Emma had a dairy throughout her life, so we know that she had at least several cows in Pennsylvania before she married, but as soon as she gets to Ohio, she has 5 cows and then 7 cows, and she expands her dairy in Ohio. And
Does
then
she have
goes on
people
to
working
Nauvoo,
for her?
have that. She has people working for her, young women that would help come and milk the cows, and then she'll process the cheese and things. So often there are young people living in the household. Every time there's a census, there's somebody in the Smith household before Emma even meets them. And so both families have this tradition, but they have people in the household helping them with their dairy, and Emma would have that.
But in 1825 is when Emma first comes in contact with Joseph. And he comes down to this northern Pennsylvania area because the locals think in the Aquago Mountain there's some sort of a Spanish silver mine.
Yeah, they're looking for this mine. There is a settlement where the Susquehanna River comes into Pennsylvania for the second time. There's an early settlement that has artifacts. It was established by the French, but there are Spanish helmets and other items there that suggest there was some interaction. Perhaps that's what they were looking for, and they were mistaken in the location of where they were trying to find it. But here, there was also a small Indian encampment that's marked on some of the earlier maps where the Native Americans were doing some things, and there's a connection between the Native Americans and finding things in some of their graves and some gold rings and other things, and encourages people around here to begin looking for other items. And a neighboring family to the Hales, the Westfalls, have a large section of property, and that's where they begin digging, is on this property.
Well, and I guess it was quite a community event. We know that Josiah Stoll was the one who went clear up to upstate New York because he had heard about this kid who could find buried treasure looking through a seer stone or something. And so he gets this idea that maybe he could hire Joseph. And because the family, Joseph Sr. and Jr., are trying to make the cash payment on their mortgage, they both accept this offer for a very reasonable price. You know, as you look at on the Joseph Smith papers of what Joseph was paid throughout his life, sometimes he's working for a whole day for less than $1, and these guys were willing to pay a lot more than that. Perspective, it sounds very inexpensive to us, but I can see why they both came down to try to help, because they needed the cash.
They encounter some problems with the treasure digging or money digging activity where they're trying to find this Spanish silver mine. One of the financiers is killed, and so Josiah Stoll takes over the project. One of his major business activities is to go up north and buy up wheat from the farmers. And he and Joseph Knight will grind that up to flour, and then they'll ship it down the river to the other communities there in Pennsylvania. So they're making a very good living at that. Joseph Smith Sr. is growing wheat up on the hill on their property, where they can plant about a week earlier than a lot of their neighbors because it drains so good.
Wow.
So they can do this summer wheat and harvest it in late September. Like September 22nd, when they're up there harvesting, when a lot of others have to harvest in the first week of October. It gives them a little bit of a heads up. So these grain buyers are up there buying their wheat from them, and they begin telling them about what Joseph Smith Jr. can do. And
Because
they
he doesn't even have the plates yet. They're
doesn't
just
even have the plates
the
yet.
neighborhood speculation and all this stuff. Oh, that's fascinating. And so the neighbors, the Harpers, and the others are part of the deal, but it's Mr. Stoll who actually goes up north. Okay.
Stoll, yep. He's
to New York.
He probably is in charge of the activity, the money digging right by then. When he's up north, but he certainly plays a major role, and he can help finance it and brings the Smiths down to help with the project.
Well, I was fascinated that part of that community that's involved includes Isaac Hale, and because it sounds like he really doesn't like it, but initially, at least, he's willing to help either feed or somehow help in the process of trying to find this Spanish treasure.
Yeah, they have extra buildings on their property, and so they're able to rent them out. There are some other people that appear to be living there before the Smiths come down, and the Hells are making a little bit of money renting to them as well. But Joseph Smith Sr., Joseph Jr., and some of these other workmen.
Yeah, they have a whole community of young men who are strong enough to dig.
I don't know if you've ever dug with an early 19th century shovel.
No, I have not.
But, the Ames shovel is not invented until 1825 that transforms the digging industry. Before then, you can do about a quart of dirt with each shovel load. And so a lot of people are digging and doing a lot of work to be able to get even anything dug. It takes a lot of time.
Well, the thing that surprised me is that Joseph, within a few weeks, talks them out of this project, says this is ridiculous, and yet he has this on his shoulders. You're a money digger, even though he was hired to do a job. He talked him out of the worthlessness of it. He moves on. He was such a good worker. He kept people in line so well that they now hire him just as a hand on the farm, both at the Stolls and at the Knights. And anyway, I'm just fascinated that this short little period of time that it wasn't even his idea becomes one of the cankers on his character.
And I think that actually, looking closely at what happened, Joseph's character really comes out here because his family is losing their property. In the fall of 1825 is when they lose it. And they're down here in Pennsylvania earning really good pay that would allow them to save that property. If they only just strung out Josiah Stoll for a little longer, kept saying, oh, you're going to find it, you're going to find it. But Joseph Jr. tells him, no, this is a wasted effort. Don't do this. You can imagine how his father, who's desperately trying to make the payment on their land, might feel when his son's talking this out of doing this. But they're an honest family, and they're not going to do work that's not productive. And Joseph says this is not productive.
Mark, I am so glad to learn that little piece of history. I didn't know that. That's fabulous. But I do know that he meets Emma then, and he took a fancy to her. And I was touched by a statement from George A. Smith, who was Joseph's cousin, who said that Emma was the most beautiful woman in the universe. And I just thought that no wonder he took a fancy to her, but she had so many wonderful characteristics in addition to being lovely.
I love that statement, and I don't know that George A. had any comparables to know that, but he was not the only one. A lot of people said very similar things to that, but it prompts Joseph when he goes home to his mother. He says, I've met the woman I'm going to marry. And he knew right away, not just because of her appearance, but because of things he had seen and had felt through the spirit.
Yeah. And at that time when he tells his parents, I found the woman I'm going to marry, had he looked in the Urim and Thummim to see who he's supposed to...
I think by the time he makes that statement, he has, but because then he knows who to look for. But Joseph is told that you'll bring the right person back to the hill.
This is Angel Moroni saying, I'll give you the plates when you bring the right person.
And who's the right person, you will know. But some of his associates say, well, he looked into the stone and he saw who the right person was. I don't think he looked and saw her before he met her. I think that he had to know who that was before he received that answer.
Because it was 4 years. He kept going back and learning as he went.
Yeah.
Now that we've heard a little bit about what Emma looked like, I wanted to share with you a description of Joseph. This is from Rough Stone Rolling, Richard Bushman. He was a handsome young man, over 6 feet tall, with broad chest and shoulders, light brown hair, blue eyes, long, thick lashes, bushy brows, and a little beard. So my mom is a Smith, and there's a lot of characteristics of that bushy brow and the light beard that we still carry on in the genetic pool. But they meet that fall, and either he's a day laborer for the Stolls, or he goes up to the Knights. But he never worked for the Hales, did he? Mr. Hale?
As far as we know, he didn't ever work for the Hales.
Okay. I think it must have been very difficult, though, for both of them to be very attracted to each other, and Emma's parents to not be too happy about it.
So Joseph, as he's courting Emma, some things about marriage at that time were changing. And one of those was to actually ask the parents for a young woman's hand. Well, my sons-in-law have all asked for to my 5 daughters.
Well-trained, good men.
And so nice young men do that, but it wasn't really required. It wasn't that common for young men to do that. But Joseph went ahead and asked Isaac Hale for Emma's hand in marriage. And he appears to have gone back and asked a second time, too, hoping that maybe Isaac would change his mind. But there was a prominent Methodist minister at that time who'd published a lot of things, who had not done that. He had eloped with his wife, and he hadn't asked for her hand in marriage, asked her father for hand in marriage. They just went out and did that. And so we tend to think of Joseph eloped because he didn't get that permission, but he didn't actually have to have the permission at that time.
Well, I also want to just remind everyone, it's legal to get married in America at age 14 in 1827.
With your parents' permission.
And she is now 22.
She's an adult, and so she doesn't need that parent's permission anymore.
But her sister lives up across the border in New York, and so she goes up to visit her sister one time. But I assume that most of the travel, Joseph was coming down to visit and court her.
I think most of the time, if not almost all the time, Joseph is down courting Emma, trying to win her hand. And it takes clear until the end. And some convincing. But he's attending 2 different schools at that time he's courting her.
Oh, really?
Trying to improve his education. And so education seems to be one issue. I think it comes from Isaac. Emma later says, well, he can't even write a well-worded letter.
But her father wasn't really educated either.
Her father wasn't particularly educated, but he had high hopes for her because she was.
Okay.
She could write well. And I think that Joseph's trying. That's why, he seems to have asked for Emma's hand a second time, maybe showing that he had improved on some of those features. But that's one thing that he's working on.
So he's working for Mr. Stoll. He's going to school. He's in his snow cutter coming back and forth courting. But it sounds like in January of 1827, she actually goes up to visit her sister. I presume she knew full well that she would also like to stop off and see in the neighborhood her suitor.
She knows Joseph's there. She knows where he's living, about a few miles away from where her sister and her brother-in-law are living, and so the Watsons are there in the Colesville area. And she goes to visit.
And it sounds like Joseph's friend, Mr. Knight, had something to do with, after Joseph proposed, Mr. Knight gave a good second witness that he's a good man or something?
Well, he certainly, the sleigh seems to come from him. They help to kind of get Joseph and Emma up to, they have nowhere to live. So they go up to the Smith house.
Well, I'm also fascinated with the fact that he goes to a justice of the peace, or a judge, to marry them. And this is a judge who's already worked with Joseph and already defended Joseph, saying he's not a ne'er-do-well.
They go to Zachariah Tarbell. They're not far from their home, and they're married in his house. And the young women, Emma's age, down in the Harmony area, they're not only courting these young men, but they're practicing marriage, and they're making plum cakes, and they have a little reception line, and they do those things as kind of their fun time to practice their marriage that they're dreaming about. Really? Emma gives up on all of that. There's no reception for her. There's no plum cake. There are no sugar plums in the pocket. Anything.
Did her sister come?
We don't know
Okay.
if there were witnesses, but if she had family, it was only her sister. Joseph may have had, they would have had somebody as a witness to the ceremony. It could have been the Stolls or the Knights that were there, but it was a very small group, and neither one of them had family with them.
Okay. I know this is a record that was recorded later, but I still appreciate the fact that it's Emma's words. I had no intention of marrying him when I left home, but during my visit to Mr. Stoll's, your father visited me there, and being importuned by your father, aided by Mr. Stoll, who urged me to marry him, and preferring to marry him to any other man I knew, I consented. I just love the fact, because if she's this very beautiful, very capable, very independent woman, she would have had suitors before age 22 in that world if she could have been married by 14. I just feel like, no, there could have been a lot of men knocking on her door for a conversation. So for her to have mentioned that is sweet.
There were young men her age in the valley. One of them, George Washington Lane, her age, he ends up becoming the leader of the Methodist congregation for half of the country, in later life. And so she had other options, but she chose Joseph.
Yeah. So after the wedding, they leave the Coldsville area and go up to Palmyra. It's long. On Google Maps, you'll get one thing, but those roads where the postal roads were make it much longer. And when they arrive there, Lucy welcomes them in, and Emma only has with her the things that she brought for a weekend visit with her sister. It's just really heart-wrenching. And they're still living in the framed house. The Smiths are renting it right now, thanks to the Quaker friend. They're renting it back. So she does enter a lovely home that's just a little bit smaller than the home she was used to. But it is very differently furnished, and it would have been a transition.
Lemuel Durfee owns the house now. His daughter, Mary, is Mary Durfee Nichols, and her husband, Roswell, are going to move in a couple of years. And so the Smiths can't afford to put much more into the house. It was unfinished at the time. But Lucy says that when Joseph goes down to get Emma, that she spends her time in preparation, preparing the house. It's customary then for a young man to have a house waiting for his bride when they get married. But not all young men could manage that, and so they received a portion of their parents' home as their space. And looking very carefully at the Manchester home that survives, we can actually see where they prepared a place for Joseph and Emma to stay.
Wow.
They whitewashed the walls. And you can look, the image that's on your screen, if you look at that large chest there in the corner, we know a large chest was there because the whitewash goes around an empty space. They didn't move the furniture to
As
whitewash
they're doing
it.
the whitewash.
And they moved a door in one of the other rooms. We can see how they moved the boards to where they're upside down so they could make some space. Had a little area, a little room that they added into the kitchen.
Did they not have wallpaper on the walls?
They had some newspaper on one of the walls that they put up to give a little more privacy, because you could still see between the batten boards, because they hadn't gotten the lath and the plaster up. Mary and Roswell Nichols, when they move into the home, the first thing they do is cover this all up with lath and plaster and preserve it exactly the way the Smith family had it when they left the home.
They just hadn't finished the home because they had lost it.
Yeah, they hadn't finished it. And so so we know, because those newspapers they cut out and put up on the wall, we could date the advertisements in there because of the order that they were in.
Brilliant, Mark.
We knew exactly when that took place. And Don Enders did all that work, and he was able to date that.
Such great archaeological evidence here. So it was just about 8 months after their marriage that Emma joins Joseph on September 21st, shortly after midnight, to go the 3 miles or so from their home to get the plates.
Yes, he was told to bring the right person. That right person turned out to be Emma. There are 2 different accounts. One suggests that she waits at the foot of the hill for Joseph, and the other suggests that she went up to the top and turned her back and knelt and was praying when that happened. So we don't know what that exact detail was.
Well, like who are the accounts from? Lucy?
One was Martin Harris, and the other was from a neighbor, Willard Chase.
Oh, interesting. Which one's Willard Chase's story?
That they waited down at the bottom of the hill.
Oh, so Martin says she went up.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Lucy recorded that she saw Emma putting on her gloves and her riding coat. And it's in the fall. It's going to be chilly during the evening hours. But Lucy can't sleep after they leave. And she begins praying the rest of the night, everyone knowing exactly. Although most people would have thought it would have been the next day when Joseph would have gone. Of course, this was done in order to avoid Mr. Chase and those people that were trying to stop the work. I think this is one example of how Emma becomes a witness. She's the first one to know that Joseph actually received the plates. Everyone is expecting them every year as he goes back on September 22nd. Remember, these were sacred days in the Jewish calendar as well. God's timing is always part of the miracle. But Lucy and Emma and other women also were able to heft and feel. And I just feel like the female witnesses were not allowed to be a public legal entity in that day and age, but they are now. So I just want to include her as one of the witnesses of this great and marvelous work of the bringing forth of the Book of Mormon.
She was actually a witness probably more than some of the other women who were involved, because when they go back from the hill, Joseph's at the reins driving the horse. They wouldn't have put the breastplate and the stones just in the back of the wagon to bounce around. She would have held those on her lap. And later on, as they begin the translation process, in the early part of that, where they have those Nephite interpreters, Emma's closely involved in that. And she's the one that later makes the pouch for Joseph's seer stone. So she's very much involved in the translation part of this process and the artifacts associated with that. She was a witness of those.
Yeah. And she even was a scribe. And the amazing thing to me is that's, a year later or so, but her brother was a scribe. We have a record of Reuben Hale helping, too.
Yep, she says that Reuben, and she's not really sure if Alva helps in the process or not, but she knows that both of those brothers were very much involved in protecting the plates and the translation. And so she plays a big role, but some of her family members do in that beginning time as well. Day after day, hour after hour, she's a scribe for Joseph.
In fact, I've got one of her statements, and it's given later in her life, unfortunately, but I really appreciate it. I once felt the plates, as they thus lay on the side of the table, tracing the outline and shape. They seemed to be pliable like thick paper and would rustle with a metallic sound when the edges were moved by the thumb, as one sometimes does the edges of books. And I can imagine if she's a dairymaid, she's in the kitchen, and Joseph is in the kitchen translating, and she has to move the plates aside to do some of her work. And this is all just amazing to me that she is right there, and it speaks so highly of her. She continues on, I am satisfied that no man could have dictated the writings of the manuscript unless he was inspired. For when acting as his scribe, your father would dictate to me hour after hour, just as you just had said, returning after meals or after interruptions. He would at once begin where he had left off, without either seeing the manuscript or having any portion of it read to him. There were no delays over obscure passages or difficulties over the choice of the words. No time was wasted in investigations of arguments of the value or intent or meaning of certain characters and why there were no references to authorities. All was as simple as when a clerk writes from dictation. The translation of the characters appeared on the Urim and Thummim, and sentence by sentence, and as soon as one was correctly transcribed, the next would appear. So this is as close as we have, I believe, to a witness as Oliver's writings. She was a scribe. She recorded what she heard and saw. I love Emma's testimony.
Yes.
And it was written down late in her life to her son, but she concluded in that record, and though I was an active participant in these things that transpired, and was present during the translation of the plates, and had cognizant of things as they transpired, it is a marvelous to me, a marvel and a wonder, as much as to anyone else. Now, do you think she ever talked to her kids about this early, or are these all just statements from the end of her life? What do you think, Mark?
I think she told her kids some of this earlier. So when her oldest son comes and interviews her, not long before she dies, he has already heard some of these stories, but he's asking her to repeat them for the record.
Yeah. Good for him. We also get Joseph's mother's record, which I really appreciate Lucy's record that she wrote shortly after Joseph's death. And she's describing Emma as a mother-in-law who is very close to her. Whatever her hands found to do, she did it with her might, until she went so far beyond her strength that she brought upon herself a heavy fit of sickness, which lasted for weeks. And although her strength was exhausted, still her spirits were the same, which in fact was always the case with her under the most trying circumstances. And I have never seen a woman in my life who would endure every species of fatigue and hardship from month to month and from year after year with that unflinching courage, zeal, and patience which she has always done, for I know that which she had to endure. And I'm thinking this is especially important to me that she is recording this right at the death, after the death of Joseph. So she is also referring to Emma enduring her last trimester of pregnancy at the time of the martyrdom of her husband.
Yes.
Later, Joseph recorded, "With what unspeakable delight and what transports of joy swelled my bosom when I took in by the hand on that night my beloved Emma. She that was my wife, even the wife of my youth, and the choice of my heart, the fatigues and toils and sorrows and sufferings and the joys and consolations, undaunted, firm, and unwavering, unchangeable Emma." He just adored her. And she also wrote letters of him that let you know that she loved him as well. "You may be astonished at my bad writing and incoherent manner, but you will pardon all when you reflect on how hard it would be for you to write when your hands were stiffened with hard work and your heart convulsed with intense anxiety. But I hope there are better days to come to us yet. I am ever yours, affectionately, Emma Smith." We have about, I don't know, how many letters do we have back and forth, Mark? We have a lot.
There are quite a few letters.
And in my handout attached to this, I just have 9 of them. But the Joseph Smith Papers Project have opened so many more to us. And one time Joseph is writing to Emma in 1839, "If you want to know how much I want to see you, examine your feelings, how much you want to see me, and judge for yourself. I would gladly walk from here to you, barefoot, bareheaded, and half naked to see you, and think it a great pleasure, and never count it toil." You know, their sacrifices for one another were really great. But Joseph and Emma, after they're married, after they've got the plates, they leave and come down to Harmony to live by Emma's family. And I guess Joseph had even written the family and before they got the plates and said, can Alva come up with a wagon to help us? Is that accurate information?
Well, we don't know the content of the letter, but Joseph does request from the family that they move down to live with them. There's a neighbor of theirs later remembers that Emma would come over and just sob, say, I've got myself into a hard place.
You mean when she's up in Palmyra?
When she's up in, the Manchester area living with the family, so that they, is probably some homesickness, but things might not be such hard work down there, because her family has a lot of resources they can help with.
So there is more than just the persecution that Joseph was having to hide the plates and all that was going on.
And there's the concern about persecution, which is starting to increase in trying to find the plates. And then there's also Emma is expecting. And you can imagine wanting to be with your mom.
Of course.
And for that child. And so all of those things play a role in it. But the one that predominates is the protecting the plates, because that's trying to get those plates out and get them back down. But those other things all play a role too.
And when they arrive, they are still in Emma's parents' home. For a couple months, 2.5 months, they stay there with her parents?
Yeah, 2.5 months.
December, January, February?
And then into early February, they move out.
Okay.
And so there's Joseph lets his father-in-law heft the plates. He fills them. He keeps them in a glass box. The Smith family, when they built their frame home, they got 3 boxes of glass from the Geneva Glass Works Company. And they use those boxes for the plates.
So when you say a glass box, you don't mean that it was clear, see-through. You mean it was strong enough to carry glass.
Exactly.
Okay.
And one of those boxes survives from the company to where we could know its exact dimensions. And if you make a replica of the plates and drop them in there, there's a 1/2 inch to spare.
Oh, it's perfect
so
size.
It's exactly the size of a box that they would have needed. Isaac Hale then hefts that. He lifts the box.
Oh, he does.
And so he is allowed to fill those, know that the plates are in there, but he wants to see him, and Joseph says he can't, and so he insists that he take the plates out of the house. And so Joseph hides them in the side of the hill.
So even in the middle of the winter, he goes up.
In the middle of the winter, they've arrived in early December, and so he's got to dig this hole in the snow, find, and make a spot in the mountainside to hide the plates.
And then how do you find him again? Okay.
Yep. He knows how to do that.
And he keeps the Urim and Thummim on himself so he can also see that way.
Yeah, watch if they're safe.
How many of Emma's 8 siblings were there when she and Joseph come back in 1828?
Well, they're all living in the area. Elizabeth and her husband, Benjamin Wasson, they've moved up to Colesville, and that's why Joseph had gone up there. But her sister Trial and Trial's husband Michael are living on part of the Hale property up in the woods, and the others are surrounding them on other properties. Some of them have bought land, but most haven't. They're just renting.
Okay, great. Are they all married?
Almost all, yeah. Reuben's not yet married.
Okay, her youngest brother.
And David's not married.
I'm fascinated, if you want to look at the family tree that I have on my handout or on our slides here. Emma's family was involved in this scribe work, or helping a little bit. We've got not only Alva bringing up the wagon and helping the family transport and the barrel of beans and staying on the wagon overnight, but Reuben's one of the scribes.
Yeah.
And do we know about anything of the rest of her family? I think.
Well, we know that her sister Trial's husband, Benjamin, makes a box, a red Morocco box. Morocco is the red leather that goes around a fancy box that they keep the record in. And the record could be either the manuscript or the plates. And so he's contributed in that way, too.
And what role did Alva play in the community? Didn't you tell me he was a...
He was a constable at the time that Joseph and Emma arrived.
So they're protecting and keeping things safe, and Isaac Hale is initially welcoming them.
December 27th, they arrive. February of 28, they're translating. Then Martin Harris comes down in April of 28. They lose the manuscript, or he loses the manuscript, and then they don't get the privilege to translate again until that fall.
And of course, Emma's loss of the child is an
so
enormous part of all of this.
Make no progress.
Yeah. Next week, we will continue on more of Emma's family history. And why didn't all of her family members believe, or what level of belief did they have? But as we conclude this part about Emma, I would like to just testify that we can all raise our voices and witness, as Emma did, to the veracity of the plates of the Book of Mormon through the witness of the Spirit. And I am one of those who has exerted my faith and read and studied, and I'm so grateful for the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the role that not only Joseph played, but Emma as a servant of God. And I leave this with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.